Welcome to the Food Startups Podcast, connecting the opaque world of food startups.
He is a man on a mission looking to neutralize alkaline water, remove existing carbon from the atmosphere. It's really about keeping the carbon in soil to do positive things. He has helped grown and built other businesses in the past, and he understands the power of a sound business model and execution. And he's looking to help farmers do large-scale organic or be biosustainable. And his name is Mike Wolk. Mike, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Good. So you told me you are driving out in San Joaquin Valley?
Yeah, San Joaquin Valley here in California, probably the most fertile farmland in the entire world.
Gotcha. Now, this is in the news right now. Can you tell us exactly what's going on with the California drought?
Well, it's the worst drought in history. Farmers that I talk to have seen the prices of their water go up exponentially, literally 100-fold. Farmers are leaving across the state of California, about 500,000 acres fallow. They're under enormous pressure here to continue to run their business, put food on their table, even though we have massive water constraints and other environmental constraints in this state around fertilizer and chemical use. So farmers are really getting whacked on all levels.
Now, okay, here's a tough question. And this is something that, a lot of people that are not able to understand. I don't understand the science behind global warming. I know very high level stuff, but is it possible to say that this drought has to do with global warming?
Well, that's an issue of debate that scientists and policymakers can do battle over for quite some time. But certainly, drought and major shifts in what scientists call the water cycle has been foretold as a consequence of climate change. So, I believe climate change is real. I tend to believe that this drought is a manifest of climate change. But that's really a debate that will have to be settled at some point by scientists and policymakers.
Gotcha. Just like a lot of issues in medicine, right? With cancer and all sorts of infirmities, right? They're just, they're not quite sure. And there's smart people on both sides, smart and respected people on both sides. Okay. So you graduated from Cal Poly in microbiology. What were you doing before growing up? What did you want to do with your life?
Well, when I was a kid in high school, I was in FFA, the Future Farmers of America. It's a marvelous organization for kids, teaches them leadership, teaches them how to grow about business, teaches them really about vocational agriculture, and had an amazing experience. I grew up in Orange County, which at the time was a relatively interesting farming community around oranges, citrus, strawberries, etc. That's no longer true. But at one point, I thought I really wanted to be a veterinarian. Got into college, just sort of grew up and matured, really loved the sciences, was intrigued by microbiology and chemistry, but then really kind of sort of evolved as an individual to more entrepreneurial pursuits as opposed to medicine. So I changed majors, studied microbiology and chemistry, got out, and pretty soon thereafter started my first company.
Your first company was Metachem Technologies, correct?
Yeah, it was. Metachem, we made reagents, chromatography consumables, sample preparation devices that were used for pharmaceutical research. So we sold products to all of the major drug companies, Pfizer, Merck, Glaxo, et cetera, for drug discovery applications. I sold that company with my other co-founders 9 years later to Varian.
Gotcha. And Mike, how old are you today?
I just turned 50.
So this was quite a few years ago then.
Yeah, you don't need to keep reminding me, Matt.
I won't go back to it.
I keep telling my kids, 50 is the new 40, but I got lots of energy left. But you're right, it was quite some time ago. I've had quite an experience.
Well, listen, Mike, I want to go a little bit more into your career and how you got to where you are today. But I think there's something to be said that the years of experience and the way that your career kind of fits together, I'm sure it's definitely matured your view on the world and especially how you can change the world. We were talking before the podcast started about the importance of doing things on large scale, not just for incentives, right? For farmers and people to buy in, you can make a lot of money. You need to incentivize people to do it. But just the fact that you may know someone that has a self-sustainable house or small ranch where they have their own garden, et cetera. And that's great. That's amazing. But its effect in terms of removing carbon from the atmosphere, et cetera, it's going to be minimal. And so you understand that you have to go big to make a big dent in this problem we have with carbon.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, carbon is a global problem. You could think of it as really sort of go big or go home. From my standpoint, unless you can really affect change in broadacre farming, you're really not going to make an impact in the world. On the very other end of the spectrum is gardening. I mean, gardening is cool, gets dirt on your fingernails, helps you connect with the soil, all that sort of good stuff, but it doesn't really change the world. To change the world on a meaningful scale, you have to think big. And just think about what kind of flux or change the world is going to see in the next couple of decades. I mean, pretty soon we're going to have close to 10 billion people on Earth. We're not making more land. We're really not making all that much more water. So we need to radically increase the amount of food that is produced on currently cultivated lands, or we've got to clear out millions and millions and millions of square miles of forestry land, grassland, and drain wetlands to feed the world, or this problem is going to resolve in a catastrophic way. I think the best resolution of the problem is to help farmers radically increase productivity, radically increase water efficiency, radically increase the nutritional content as well as the calorific content of the foods that are produced. And if we can do all three of those and at the same time suck huge volumes of carbon out of the atmosphere and stick it into soil where, unlike carbon in the atmosphere or carbon in the ocean, carbon in the soil does marvelous things to affect what? Soil fertility, water efficiency, and food nutritional content. It's a marvelous equation if we can make it work.
I talked to Mike. I was like, listen, you know so much here, but for the non-experts, right? So carbon in the soil can do great things, whereas carbon, when it gets released in the atmosphere, it combines. I guess it's one of the factors that puts a hole in the ozone layer, which then allows for global warming, correct?
That's an error. It doesn't actually produce a hole in the ozone layer. It traps heat within the atmosphere, but that's not the same thing as a hole in the ozone layer. So the effect on the world is basically just to increase the amount of energy from the sun that is retained on the surface of the Earth, and that heats up the global climate. The ozone layer is a different problem. That's one that we don't address.
So, okay, ozone, completely different problem.
Correct.
Let's go into some of the other missions you guys have. You talked about neutralizing briny well water. The way I understand brine, it's just kind of water mixed with salt. Now, why do you want to neutralize briny well water?
Well, here's the problem. First off, in the state of California, farmers, particularly in the southern part of the Central Valley, Bakersfield, Tulare, Modesto, those areas, the amount of surface water that they have historically been allowed to use has been dropped massively. In fact, many farmers have been told they have zero surface water. So consequently, farmers are having to punch wells in the surface of the earth and drill down hundreds of feet to pull up groundwater. That groundwater has two problems with it quite often. Number one, it's high pH. Plants don't like high pH water. And the second problem is it's loaded with salts, primarily calcium carbonate salts. So what happens is if you have salt water, if you've ever gone into the ocean and you've come out and let the water dry, you have salt residue on your skin. You don't like it. It doesn't feel good. It's itchy. When the water is used on crops and it evaporates, it leaves behind these salts, which hurt the plants, and it destroys the fertility and productivity of the soil over time. So on the one hand, farmers have no recourse but to pull well water up from deep in the earth and use it on their farms. Otherwise, they just don't have a crop. And on the other hand, the long-term consequence is the salting of their soils. Now, there's a way that farmers have historically addressed that, and that is to use sulfuric acid, which is a strong acid. It's a dangerous acid, can burn you and hurt you. On the other hand, if you can produce organic acids and other compounds from plant matter, you can use that material to accomplish the same thing of neutralizing the carbonate salts, reducing the pH to neutral or slightly acidic, which helps the farmers. It helps the farmers because they're not salting up their land. And secondly, plants like slightly acidic water. It also boosts the amount of productivity that farmers can see on their soil by acidifying their briny, high pH well water.
Gotcha. In the deck that you sent over to me, you did this comparison photo with a kale crop in 24 hours. I'm curious, what exactly happened there? What did you guys do to make a huge improvement? And listeners, I'm going to talk to Mike after the podcast to see if I can maybe add those before and after photos or reference some type of study so you guys can visually see. Their website is still not live yet. But Mike, can you just tell us in layman's terms, of course, right, the kale crop, how did it change so dramatically in 24 hours?
Well, on the kale crop, it was a different application. On the kale crop, what we were doing there, we're trying to kill aphids that were infecting the kale. So what we're doing here, Matt, is this solution that we're talking about, that on the one hand, at about 1,000,000 to 1 dilution can be used to neutralize ag water. At maybe 200 or 100 to 1, it can be used to kill plant damaging insects. So just imagine anywhere from 100 to 1 to 1,000,000 to 1 dilution ratios, how many different applications there are for farmers to address problems that are impacting their bottom line. So let's talk about green aphids, for example, on kale. There are relatively few, if any, organic solutions that can kill aphids on crops. So why is it that our solution kills these aphids within seconds, less than a minute upon contact? What we're doing, Matt, broadly, is we're taking mountains of plant cellulosic waste. And within that cellulosic structure are compounds that plants produce naturally to ward off plant-eating insects and pathogens. We're basically collecting those liquids out of otherwise dried plant matter and using those chemicals, again, that plants produce naturally, and reapplying that to the crop. To do what? To kill plant-damaging insects, to manage pathogens, to neutralize alkaline water. So, and you think about how much plant waste we're producing in North America, it's an absolutely enormous number. We produce well over 1 billion tons of farm and forest waste products every year just in the United States.
Wow.
Now, what if we took all of that, Matt? What if we took all of that and we said, okay, 30% of that can be broad spectrum, organic, natural, pick the adjective you want here, biopesticides. Biopesticides that can also be used to neutralize high pH briny well water, as we've just discussed. And what if in addition to that 30%, you thought 20% of that could be oil, high quality oil that can be used for a wide variety of industrial practices like making plastics or chemicals or fuels or lubricants? And then what if in addition to 30% pesticide, 20% oil, you could also produce 30% of a soil amendment that when put into the soil permanently removes carbon from the atmosphere and helps farmers rebuild the fertility of their soil. So we look at all this waste that is out there that is abundant and cheap and otherwise just basically recycling carbon into the atmosphere. We think there is a better way to monetize that into higher value products that help farmers go biosustainable at great scale and at the same time do marvelous things for the climate and the environment.
So yeah, there's just a huge theme here, with Back to the Roots and Hungry Harvest on previous episodes. And I know Mike got to meet Back to the Roots at the Food Bite Summit. Tiny Farms was there. And we've already talked a lot on the podcast about using insects and sustainability and the feasibility of creating protein and meat and food without using so much water, which happens a lot with cattle. I think that's great. And one thing you also mentioned to me before we started was the energy used to run these processes, right? Taking a metric ton, you have the biochar, you have the pyroligneous acid, the biooils, but then there's actually 200 kilograms of natural gas collected for, as an energy source to run the process, if I understood that correctly. So can you tell me about that? How this whole process is basically, I guess you could say it's a sustainable process. How would you classify it?
Well, it's a completely sustainable process. 20% of the biomass gets converted into a natural gas. The natural gas is what we use as an energy source to continually run the process. So remember, to be clear, you start off with, let's say, a ton of dry biomass. 79% of that dry ton of biomass gets converted into products. The rest of that is what we call technically a non-condensable gas. It's natural gas, primarily comprised of methane, a little bit of hydrogen, and that is the energy source that we use to continually run our reaction. So our process uses no energy, it produces no waste, it produces no harmful emissions. The technical term for this is it's completely exothermic. People will understand that if they know the science a little bit. So it's just terrific. And moreover, the products that we produce are completely carbon negative. So it's not as if we're just sustainable or carbon neutral or have a low footprint. We have a negative footprint. And I think that's pretty cool.
A negative footprint. Okay. I've heard that, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I've heard about hemp plants. They have like a negative footprint as well if it's done correctly. We're talking like big agri industry. Let's just say I'm running a large agricultural company. Maybe I'm farming corn or soy. How are you going to explain it to them? How are you going to incentivize them and pitch them to work with you?
Farmers are going to buy our product because they're going to make more money. If you think about farming as just like running a profit and loss statement, what are your revenues? What are your costs? The difference between those are your profits. If we can go to farmers and show them how we can increase their overall crop yield. If we can go to farmers and say, we'll not only increase your crop yield, but we think we can reduce the amount of water that you use, which is prohibitively expensive in California now. We can reduce the amount of fertilizer that you use, and we can help you go organic so you get an additional premium on the pricing for your product. Farmers will look at this as a real great opportunity to become more profitable. I think that is why farmers will buy the product. In addition to that, farmers will feel good about using the product because it does great things for the environment. One other aspect of providing value to farmers is increasing the fertility and therefore the productivity and quality of the land over time. One of the benefits of adding biochar to soils is really the opportunity to rebuild soil fertility, not just for a single crop rotation, but permanently. I think that's a pretty exciting opportunity to increase soil fertility, particularly soils that have been depleted from decades and decades of abuse and synthetic chemical use.
So biochar, I know I talked to you about this before as well, and if I'm correct, it's very similar or maybe the same, not the same process, but the idea of, I know in Montana and other places, forest fires can actually help make the soil more fertile. And so biochar, how is that related? Fill me in here.
Well, biochar is produced in forest fires. We think of forest fires, we don't think too much about prairie fires. I mean, when was the last time you saw a fire rip through a farmer's field? That doesn't happen any longer. But even in California, we used to have delta fires that would burn hundreds of thousands of acres every season. And that carbon would go back into the soil, replenish it, stimulate fungal growth. Think about this, in forest fires, the first animals to come back are really mushrooms and fungus and mushrooms, mycorrhiza. These sorts of animals, or if you will, are essential to soil fertility. They come back like never before following a forest fire. So biochar is produced naturally in forest fires, and so are some of the other liquids that we condense. Unfortunately, growing or managing forest fires is really kind of a terrible way to build a business. And losing all of those condensable gases into the atmosphere is a pollution nightmare. What we've basically done is taken a lot of the elements of forest fires and put modern chemical engineering around that to build really high quality biochars and collect those liquids that otherwise get lost in the smoke, so to speak, into the atmosphere. We monetize all of those derivatives in our process.
Gotcha. Okay, so you're not just showing up, these farmers in a drone and say, all right, great, I'm just going to torch your farm and you're good to go. Okay.
No, of course not. No.
Yeah, just double checking here because we haven't had any arsonists on the podcast yet. Anyway, I'm just kidding, guys. So, Mike, I love your pitch to farmers, right? Because sometimes, okay, so I work with dehydrated organic fruits, and we've been pitched by people that have solar power to dehydrate the fruit, and there's a lot of problems with it. But the biggest thing is like cost, right? So it's like you're going to have to spend so much money to get this going, and like we love the idea, but we haven't found a way to make it economically sustainable. So I love how you're just going in your pitch, like, listen, you're going to make more money, use less water, et cetera, et cetera. So it seems like you can get these farmers to listen to you. And that's really important, as you know, since you've worked in sales before and growing your business. I mean, we're talking today, the very end of June here, the last day of June. Where do you guys see yourselves a year from now? Where do you want to be in terms of clients, revenue, et cetera?
Well, right now we're pre-revenue. We're working with science, with our farmers and scientists to validate the product in the field. Next year, I hope we're in full-scale revenue and really driving this business forward. So wish us luck. I'm quite optimistic.
Great, Mike. Well, listen, I really appreciate you coming on. Now, for our listeners, I know the website isn't live yet, but maybe by the time they get they listen to this podcast a little bit, and it's Corigin, CORIGIN.co. I imagine eventually you guys will have plenty of information on there that people can read if they're interested in these types of potentially world-changing subjects.
Up until now, Matt, we've been operating somewhat in stealth mode. Maybe with this interview, it's time to go public.
Yeah, I hope so, man. I think everyone wants to learn about this stuff, and B2B sales, right? Get your name out there, make some white papers, et cetera, et cetera. You know better than I do. I'm just kind of shooting ideas off the top here. But and Mike, if users want to contact you directly, how can they get in touch with you?
Mike at Corigin.co.
Okay, Mike at Corigin.co. All right, Mike, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure, Matt.
Hey guys, thanks so much for listening. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, find us online at foodstartupspodcast.com.